Welcome to Scrollin', a podcast about the Elder Scrolls Online. I'm Ket, and this is episode number 7-2. So, this is actually the real episode number 7. I made a mistake in the last episode, and, basically what had happened is I had recorded an episode before that, but I wasn't really happy with how it turned out. So I never made it available to people, but then I forgot about that. And so when I recorded the next one, in my mind, it's episode number 7, but as far as people who are listening to this, that was actually the 6th episode that was made available. So I'm labeling this one 7-2 just so that I can get back, basically as a course correction, get back to the correct numbers for the episode. So next episode will be episode number 8. It actually will be the 8th episode that is available to people, and then we'll be correct from then on forward. So this isn't really, 7-2 seems to imply that maybe it's a sequel to the last episode, but that's really not the case. Although the last episode we talked mostly about PTS, and then this is we'll be talking mostly about the live patch that, resulted from the PTS. So I guess you could think of it as a sequel in a way. But really it's really just me correcting my own mistakes as far as the episode numbering goes. So most of the changes that were proposed in the first week of PTS have actually gone through and have gone live more or less in the state that we talked about in the last episode. So we won't spend too much time rehashing all of that stuff, but there are some key things that were changed on PTS since that first week. So we'll definitely touch base on those. And then we'll also touch on some of the more significant changes maybe that we talked about last time. Now it's been like a week or so since the patch has been live. We've had a chance to feel it out and see how these changes actually feel in practice. So we'll touch on those things and kind of talk about what we're thinking about it now that we've actually had a chance to check it out. So before we get into all that, I just want to do a quick run through of some of these quality of life additions that they made. We already mentioned these last week, but they're actually in the game now. We've got to use them, and it's pretty cool. And just in case you missed it, so we have multi-crafting now. You can do bulk actions at crafting stations now. So now when you visit a crafting station, say you have, 500 ancestor silk, a stack of 500 raw ancestor silk that you want to refine, and you want to refine the whole stack. Well, now you can do that with just one button. You press R to refine, and by default, it'll refine that entire stack unless you change those values. So no more do you have to do just 10 at a time, 10 at a time, 10 at a time. Now it's just one button. It refines all of them instantly. Whatever mats that you got from all that, it shows you instantly what all they are. I'm a big fan of this change. And also, of course, I craft potions almost every single day. I can just do a one shot of, a 200 stack of potions with one button. Really, really nice. I'm a big fan of multi-crafting. I think this makes console players' lives especially a lot better, but even PC players. I mean, even the add-ons we had to alleviate this were not as good as this is. So I'm a big fan of this. Of course, there's the new Undaunted key changes. So now you don't unlock chests with Undaunted keys anymore. Now you just go directly to the NPCs who gave you the quest to begin with. And then they have these various coffers to choose from. And we talked about kind of what all the differences between those coffers are. But long story short, you buy the basic coffer, which is basically equivalent to the old Undaunted chests. The same kind of stuff comes in there at the same drop rates. You can also get these special coffers for 5 keys that's guaranteed to give you a monster set of only 2 different options. So, for example, you could get the City of Ash 2 coffer, the City of Ash coffer, and you would either get the monster set that comes from City of Ash 1 or City of Ash 2. Those are the only 2 options. You spend 5 keys to narrow down those possibilities quite a bit. I think that's a really cool change. And there's some other stuff too. You can directly buy style motifs for like 50 keys and stuff like that. All around, a really nice change right there, I think. Another big deal now is purchasable skill lines, and this has been, maybe a topic of debate since this has come up, because this is very much pushing that edge of pay to win. Is this pay to win or not? It's hard to say. So, if you earn a skill line on one character, like you actually grind it out and level it up, then you have the option to purchase that skill line for another character. I think the fact that you have to grind it out at least once in order to do that seems to make it kind of okay to me. I know a lot of people are saying like, well, like in low level PvP, like under 50 battlegrounds and stuff, this could be a nightmare for those low level players because you could have a high level player that's just rolling a new tune and they can just spend a bunch of money buying all these skill lines for themselves. And they could be like a level 30 and go into an under 50 battleground and just totally annihilate everyone because none of those people could possibly have access to those skills, especially if they're actually a new player who they really are only level 30. They don't have the option to buy these skill lines because they haven't leveled them up at least once. So in that situation, absolutely, you pay for these skill lines and you have a much higher likelihood of winning in those scenarios. So I guess this purchasable skill lines thing is maybe a bit of a buff for people who like to do a lot of smurfing. uh, you know, but I don't know. I think maybe the good outweighs the bad because I have friends that play with me, but they don't have as much free time as I do to put into the game. So whenever they do jump in, I think it's nice for them to have an option to kind of catch up to me quickly. And they still did have to put in the work at some point in the past, which again makes it seem a little easier to swallow to me. And I'll tell you straightforward, I've already bought the Undaunted skill line for one of my characters. I did feel a little dirty doing it, but I just didn't want to do that grind, plain and simple. I had this character that I was really excited about playing. I was really close to having the stats and everything just right, and all I needed was those Undaunted passives, and I just really was not feeling that grind. So I spent the money, and I bought it. And, nothing bad happened. So I'm glad it's here. I think in general I am in favor of this. If they ever make it so that you don't have to actually earn it that first time, then that'll be a bad thing. Absolutely, I would absolutely be opposed to this if that wasn't the case. But as it is right now, you do actually have to put in the work with at least one character. I can get behind it myself. The skill lines that are available for purchase are the Alliance War skills, Dark Brotherhood, Thieves Guild, Fighters Guild, Ledgermain, Mages Guild, Psijic Order, and Undaunted. And they say that Soul Magic, Vampire, and Werewolf will become available in a future update. So that's where we're at. And the skill lines that have like a full list of active skills, like Psijic Order and Undaunted, and all those cost 3,000 crowns, I believe. And then the skill lines that are basically just passives, like Dark Brotherhood, Thieves Guild, those are 2,000 crowns. A little pricey, in my opinion, but honestly, to be honest, I was expecting even more than that. To be quite, I expected these to be expensive. So anyway, that's all the quality of life stuff I wanted to go over. There are a few other things, but a little less interesting. I think these are the interesting things: multi-crafting, undaunted keys, purchasable skill lines. Those are kind of the big things there. Is it pay to win? Is it not? It is on that border. I think I kind of fall on. I am in favor of it. I kind of fall on that side just barely. But the people who are opposed to this change, I do have a hard time defending it. I see their point of view absolutely. So of course this DLC is called Scalebreaker. It is a DLC dungeon pack. So we're getting 2 new dungeons. And of course, these being DLC dungeons and them being the newest dungeons, they are probably going to be quite difficult. I haven't actually gotten in there and done them yet. I mostly do PvP, and I don't do dungeons a lot of the time, but I will get around to doing them eventually. I always do them. I always end up doing them at least once because I want to have that monster helm in my collection in case I want to use it for something. And one of these monster sets I'm very interested in. But one thing that this makes me think of, though, is, more and more the list of dungeons that we have to choose from, DLCs are making up a larger portion of that list. I mean, I think it's like half the list now are DLC dungeons. And it can kind of be a pain point for someone who is just like doing daily randoms. They just want to get a daily random knocked out. And when you queue up for a random veteran dungeon and you have an equal chance of getting Wayrest Sewers 1 or Scale Collar Peak, which are vastly different in terms of difficulty. Wayrest, you can basically solo that pretty much if you're a high level player. You can pretty much just walk right through it blindfolded by yourself almost. It's a very easy dungeon. Whereas Scale Collar, even with 4 fairly decent players, it's going to take a while to get through, and you may not finish it at all. So very frequently in those dungeons, in the DLC dungeons, someone gets frustrated and bails, and then everyone else is like, "Well, I'm not going to wait around for another tank to get queued in or whatever. Who knows how long that's going to take?" So everyone else bails. So a lot of the time you end up not finishing that dungeon, and a lot of time it's after like an hour's worth of effort, and that's when the group gives up, and that was all the time you had to do your random. Now you got to go have dinner or whatever. So that's a frustrating thing. I wish that they would maybe, I don't know. There's a couple of ideas that I have with how they could alleviate that. One would just be to put a checkbox on the random queue screen that just says include DLC or not. You can just check it or uncheck it, and that way when you queue for a random, you can choose whether you want those more difficult dungeons to be included in that. Seems like something they probably wouldn't do because I think that would just end up making DLC dungeons, people would run them a lot less. So it seems like they probably wouldn't be interested in that. I think probably the more practical solution is just to maybe bring up the difficulty of some of the vanilla dungeons, so they're more comparable to the DLC dungeons, and for vet and normal, because as it is right now in normal, if you're a high level like max CP player and you get into like a normal DLC dungeon, like normal Scale Collar Peak, of course it's much easier. You're going to be able to get through it no problem, more than likely. But there is still some sort of challenge going on there. You have to you do at least have to pay attention to what you're doing, and really try to get through it. Whereas a normal vanilla dungeon, you literally, like, you just look in the direction of any enemy and they just drop dead immediately. And if you're in there with low level players that are in there like trying to really do something and really have a good time, you kind of end up feeling like a jerk, because you just kill everything in sight before anyone else can even lay a hand on it. I feel like those low level players are not having a very good time in those situations. So it's a difficult choice for like a high level player to make. Do I want to queue up for a veteran dungeon, take the risk of getting into a really difficult, frustrating situation, or do I want to not take that risk? I'll just queue up for a normal dungeon, and maybe I'll get a DLC where I'm kind of challenged, but it's still pretty casual. Or I'll get a vanilla normal dungeon where I'm just ruining everyone's good time because I just destroy everything in my path simply by entering the room, more or less. So I don't know. There's a weird thing going on there. I don't know exactly what the solution is, but with more and more of that dungeon list being comprised of DLC, and there being such a big disparity in difficulty between DLCs and vanilla dungeons, it's a pain point there. And no matter which you choose, if you want to queue up for a vet or queue up for a normal, right now either one has there's negative things that come with that. So I hope that's something they look at in the future. I don't know if they will or not, but it's just something that's been on my mind. So the names of these new dungeons are Moongrave Fane and Lair of Marsalok. We talked about them last time. It's more dragon stuff. It continues the stories that we've been following along this year with the DLC and the Elsewhere expansion. So it's just going to continue that story on along in those dungeons. There's a bunch of rewards you can get based on achievements: a memento, a combat pet, some titles, a die. Honestly, I feel like the achievement awards for this dungeon pack are kind of lame. There's no skin, there's no mount. I don't think there's any costumes or anything like that. The coolest thing, it seems to me, is a die, and I don't know what that die looks like yet. I haven't seen it. A combat pet, a non-combat pet. I don't know. Does anyone get excited about those? I don't know. Maybe if it looks really, really cool, I guess. But I never really get excited about the non-combat pets. I wish they would make some more interesting rewards for achievements. I feel like these dungeon packs, bare minimum, we need a skin or a mount. Something like that is what people are going to get excited about. No one's going to, or at least not many people, are going to, grind out a difficult achievement to get a memento or a non-combat pet. Maybe the die. I could see maybe some people really wanting that die if it's a really cool die. I don't know. Of course, there's a bunch of new sets. We talked about them all last time. I'm not going to go through them all again. But I do want to point out that the 3 out of the 6 non-monster sets, right? So just take the monster sets out and just look at the normal 5-piece sets that come in these dungeons. 3 of them are focused on dealing damage, and all 3 of them are dot focused. They all proc off of doing dots, or you stack something from dot damage or something like that. Every one of them are encouraging the player to use dots. And of course, we'll talk about this here in a little bit, but dots have been heavily, heavily buffed this patch as well. And we kind of hypothesized in the last episode if this was maybe the dot patch, right? We're entering a very dot heavy meta. And just from this past week of playing the game, the answer is absolutely yes, that is the case. Dots have been heavily buffed. We got some new armor sets that also heavily buff dots. It seems to, they haven't come out and said this, but it seems to be a conscious decision on the developer's part. They want dots to be more important in combat. For PvE, that's, DPS seems to have gone up. Single target, like boss fight DPS, is basically people are getting higher numbers than they've ever gotten before, but they're mostly using single target abilities. In PvP, man, this dot meta is tough to deal with. If you're not a Templar, if you don't have a good cleanse to cleanse this stuff away, especially with a lot of the changes that were made to healing, which we'll talk about a little bit later, it's just hard to out-heal these dots a lot of the time. And so people are really having to adjust in PvP, and really the adjustments that they're making for the most part are they're just building themselves more and more tanky. And that's what we're seeing. We're seeing players that are tankier than they've ever been. It was starting to look like maybe we were going to be stepping outside of the tanky meta in PvP this patch. But the opposite is true. The tanky meta has been more reinforced, and because group healing took such a big nerf this patch. And other aspects of healing have been buffed, but overall group AoE healing has been heavily nerfed. And so you're not getting all this passive healing power just kind of by accident like you were getting before. And so out healing all these negative effects and dots and stuff is more and more on the individual player's responsibility to do that. And oftentimes it's just more than one person can do. If you don't have a dedicated healer to help you through that, then it's going to be tough. It's going to be real tough if you're not a Templar. And that's one of the reasons. There's a few reasons, but that's one of the reasons Templar are so popular right now. If you've done any PvP whatsoever, I'm sure you've seen a massive uptick in the number of Magicka Templars you're seeing right now. One big reason is because they have that on-demand, really powerful cleanse, which that alone really sets them above the rest in this dot-heavy meta. They're basically one of the only people left that can really go glass cannon and still survive long enough to really be engaged with a fight over a long period of time. On top of that, they've just recently, over the past couple of patches, have gotten some pretty significant changes that really do make them quite deadly. I think Magicka Templar is the meta class for PvP right now. They're really tearing it up. And I've been maining a Stamina Templar here lately. That feels really good too. They still have access to that cleanse, and it works really, really well. But I feel like the overall damage output isn't quite what a Magicka Templar is pulling off. It's still a lot of fun. If you're having a hard time in PvP this patch, if you're having a hard time dealing with the dots, get a Templar leveled up, Magicka or Stamina, and you'll immediately start having a much, much better time. So there's a bunch of new armor sets that come in these new dungeons. We talked about them all in the last episode. I don't think anything has changed with any of these. They're all pretty much exactly as they are when we talked about them last time. So I'm just going to skip over those. I will reiterate that I am looking forward to the Marsalok monster mask, I think it was. Oh, Grundwolf. Grundwolf. So whenever you deal critical damage, restore 1,000 magicka or stamina, whichever is higher, and then you gain 500 of the other resource. It can be an amazing sustain set for either a magicka or stamina build. I'm definitely going to be doing this Moongrave Fane dungeon at least once just to get my hands on that mask because I'm very interested in that. I could see that working on a number of different builds really, really well. The rest, I'm really not interested in. I definitely see a lot of these sets looking really powerful. A lot of these dot focus sets seem super duper strong. But honestly, I think for the most part, it's not going to be worth the grind for me. And I have other sets that get the job done for me, honestly. So I'll probably just leave those alone. But I do want that one monster set for sure. As far as old sets go, Elemental Succession was reworked a bit since the last time we talked. So the last time we talked, it was already buffed a bit. So while you're in combat, whenever you deal Flame Shock or Frost damage, you gain 550 spell damage for that element for 4 seconds. And then the last time we talked, that had an 8-second cooldown. So it lasts for 4 seconds and you have to wait another 4 seconds before it can happen again. Now it has a 4-second cooldown. So basically you can have a 100% uptime on that elemental damage type pretty darn easily. And this effect can occur every 4 seconds per element, and you can have multiple elemental buffs active simultaneously. I think that's a really, really cool thing about it too. A lot of Magicka builds, like to use a lightning staff on the back bar for AoE damage and a flame staff on the front bar for single target damage. It's a pretty popular Magicka DPS setup. And this set right here is going to buff both of those damage types. If you do your rotation right, it's going to be a 100% uptime on that 550 spell damage to both of those damage types. Seems pretty cool. And it's just a very flexible set. You can use this on a fire mage. You could use this on a lightning mage. You can use this on a frost mage. Or you could also use it on some build that is using all 3 of those damage types. And easily get a 100% uptime on that 550 spell damage for all 3 of those damage types. It's a very flexible set that can be used on a lot of different classes, a lot of different kinds of builds, and it's really strong. 550 spell damage. I mean, I've already seen people talking about replacing Burning Spellweave on their Dragon Knight with this set because it's just easier to have that constant uptime, and they're actually seeing a DPS increase, which usurping Burning Spellweave as the Mag DK set, that's really something, I think. That set's been a staple for DKs for quite a while. Of course, 7th Legion, Veiled Heritance, Ravager, they were all nerfed a bit. 7th Legion and Ravager are still totally usable. They're just different than they were before. But Veiled Heritance is basically just throw it in the dumpster now. Now you have to interrupt an enemy to gain a 400 weapon damage buff for 15 seconds. And really, how often are you interrupting enemies, really? Even PvE or PvP, right? Hardly ever. Once in a great while. So once in a great while, you'll get a 400 weapon damage increase for 15 seconds. Such a shame. This was a very popular set that a lot of people were using. I really wish they had nerfed it. It needed to be nerfed for sure, but I wish they had nerfed it in a different way. Because now it went from being a very popular set to being like bottom tier, like garbage set that nobody will ever use. I don't know, maybe I'm wrong, maybe someone will prove me wrong, but I don't think so. Veiled Heritance is out. They didn't make this change on the first week, so we didn't talk about it on the last episode, but Pirate Skeleton has been dramatically nerfed. And I think most people are feeling pretty good about this change. I think most forum conversations that I've seen are in favor of this change, are saying this needed to happen. Pirate Skeleton is too strong. So they reduced the duration from this proc to 10 seconds instead of 12 seconds. And the cooldown is now 20 seconds instead of 5 seconds. Oops, I meant 20 seconds instead of 15 seconds. So now you're going to have a maximum of 50% uptime on this. Whereas before, you only had 3 seconds of downtime in the past. And the minor defile that it gives you is now major defile. So you can only get a 50% uptime out of it, and you're going to have major defile while it's active as well. It's a pretty major nerf. Although I still have seen a few people wearing it, but it does seem less effective, absolutely, than it did before. It's time in the sun is over. This has been like a meta PvP set for a lot of people for a really long time, and I think now it's not totally useless. It's not like Veiled Heritance where it's just garbage now. I don't think that's the case for this set. I think it's just going to be less popular, and probably only certain types of builds are going to really be able to make good use out of it, rather than just literally everyone wearing this set because it's too good not to use. So I think that's a good change. This allowed like glass cannons to be super tanky, and I just don't think that's fair. You should have to choose between having a lot of damage or being really tanky, and this one set basically allowed you to have both. And on that note, as far as being tanky versus not being tanky, they've also nerfed the protective jewelry trait. So now the protective jewelry trait will give you 1190 physical and spell resistance instead of 1844. So quite a bit less there, and this is another thing that I've mostly seen positive reactions to, for the same reason as Pirate Skeleton. This is something that would allow a pure glass cannon build. They just make their jewelry protective, and then they have quite a lot of resistance while still benefiting from all their light armor passives and all that sort of stuff. Again, it just seemed too good, and it made it so that a lot of builds really weren't having to sacrifice anything. You could really just kind of have it all and be just about unstoppable. So I think that's a good change. This isn't a trait that I ever use. I don't like making really tanky characters. I prefer more of a glass cannon playstyle, and I would I usually go for more of like infused or swift or maybe even arcane or robust. I really never mess with protective. But I also mostly do non-CP, and I feel like resistance is less of a big deal there just because people are not doing quite as much damage. So that's basically all there is. All that I wanted to talk about as far as changes to armor sets and that kind of stuff. I'm gonna take a quick break, and then when I come back, we're gonna talk about some of the combat changes. Again, most of them we already talked about last time, so we won't spend too much time rehashing all that. But there were some new changes made since then, and I do want to touch on some of the stuff that we did talk about last week, now that we've had a chance to actually play with these changes, and just share some thoughts and what we've been experiencing this past week. So I'll be right back. All right, so let's get into some of these combat changes. As I said before, we already covered most of them in the last episode, so definitely check that out if you haven't already. But some changes have been made since then, and so we'll definitely touch on those. But first, just a quick recap. AoE dots across the board have been heavily nerfed. In general, when you compare an AoE dot to a single target dot, you'll find that the AoE dot will cost 33% more and do 33% less damage compared to the single target dot. And that's basically every skill that falls in this category. So we're talking Wall of Elements, Volley, Caltrops, Lightning Splash, Spear Shards, Twisting Path, Winter's Revenge, the DK's Ash Cloud. I don't know if I'm leaving anything out, but all of those skills, anything that's like that ground targeted AoE dot type of skill, 33% less damage and 33% more cost than a single target dot is what you're going to find. I also want to reiterate that it's only dots. It's not like AoE burst attacks. So like the Warden's Sub-Assault isn't affected, stuff like that. Also, ultimates are not affected as well. So the Destra's Staff ultimate, for example, that's an AoE dot. but it's an ultimate, so it's a different category of skill. It did not receive this treatment. It wasn't changed at all. So don't worry about those. Those are still super strong skills. From a PvP perspective, this is one of the best changes that has been made in a very long time. Especially if you play a melee character in like a battleground and you want to engage in a fight, up to this point, you really have no choice. You're just going to have to stand in a bunch of crap that's like constantly slowing you down and immobilizing you and passively damaging you all the time, and you really just have no choice but to just stand right in it if you want to engage in the fight at all. It's really frustrating, and it really reduces the amount of fun that a lot of people are having there. So just the fact that they're so much weaker now and they cost so much more, people are kind of being discouraged from using them. And already, I've been doing a lot of deathmatch this week, and I can already tell you that there's not nearly as much AoE on the ground as there used to be. It's all been replaced with single target dots. And that's, like we said before, this is the single target dot meta, absolutely. And that's another difficult thing to deal with, in a different way. But I think I would take this single dot meta over having a lot of AoE like we had before, because at least with the single target dots, a player has to actually look at you and intentionally hit you with the ability. Whereas with the AoE stuff, people are just kind of mindlessly throw all this junk on the ground, and they're not even aware if you're around them or not. They're just kind of passively hitting everyone with this stuff, and it's just annoying, and it makes the fight so much less enjoyable. So yeah, the single target dots are really, really strong, maybe a little too strong, but I think the fact that there's intentionality behind it, that someone has to purposefully cast that ability on you, is an improvement from just having all this passive AoE garbage around you all the time. So I would take this new dot meta over what we had before, absolutely. Even though it's a lot to deal with, I think people are still adjusting, and I think it's in general a positive change, and hopefully these single target dots maybe will be toned down a little bit in the future, or will be given some way to mitigate that a little better. I really don't know. If not, I think Tiplar is just going to continue to reign supreme, honestly. Of course, there's a lot of changes made to healing. For the most part, it's kind of getting similar treatment to what dots are getting. Group healing or AoE healing has been seriously nerfed. And single target or selfish healing is either about where it was before, or in some cases buffed a bit. The key changes, the key nerfs to group healing have been the changes to healing springs and vigor. Those are the two main skills that were making groups so very unkillable before. And we talked about those changes last time, and they've been tweaked a little bit since then, but they're still more or less in the same shape they were in on that first week of PTS. Healing Springs is now a 8-second long, non-stackable heal over time, and it's quite a bit weaker than it was before as well. And then Vigor now, you have to choose between an AoE morph or a single target morph that only hits yourself. And the AoE morph is a lot weaker than it used to be. Way, way weaker. So if you're choosing that, then you're not going to be getting that nice, strong vigor heal that you're used to having. And so what's happening is most people are choosing the resolving vigor morph, the selfish single target morph. And that's having a huge impact on just how survivable teams are. And in battlegrounds, in high MMR battlegrounds, before, a lot of the time you would run into these teams that are just unkillable. There's just so much group healing going on that you can't scratch them whatsoever. And sometimes it's because they have a dedicated healer, but oftentimes there's no healer in sight. It's just 4 stamina damage dealers all splashing each other with vigor. You have this 4-stack of vigor ticking on people at all times. That's like 8 to 10,000 healing per second that every member of that team is getting throughout the entire fight. Even without a healer, that's way too much healing to get through. You're not going to be able to kill those guys. You're not seeing teams like that anymore. Most people are choosing the single target version of Vigor, which means they're not splashing their teammates with this passive healing all the time. Everyone is kind of more responsible for keeping themselves alive. And if there are people choosing the AoE morph, which honestly I haven't seen any, but if they do choose that morph, it's way weaker than it used to be. So even then, I think it's still going to be easier than it was before to kill people in these high MMR matches. It was frustrating. This is a good change because it's so frustrating when I'll be built as a complete glass cannon. I'm stacking my weapon damage to the sky, and I'll lay everything I have into someone, and like their health bar will barely fluctuate at all because their whole team is just passively healing each other without even really meaning to. So positive change, kind of like with dots. Healing has to be more intentional, and there's a lot more value in having an actual dedicated healer in the group now as well. As far as the total amount of healing that is possible, I don't know if healing was really nerfed in general this patch. I mean, there's still a lot of healing going on. You look at the scoreboard at the end of a deathmatch, I'm still seeing healers pull 1 million heals, 1.5 million heals. You're even seeing people push 2 million heals in a match. Healing is still very, very strong, and the numbers seem to be about where they were before this patch, at least in deathmatch. Can't speak too much to PvE. I haven't really been doing a lot of PvE stuff lately, but at least in PvP, healing still seems to be very, very strong, probably about as strong as it was before. It's just kind of being concentrated in different areas and distributed a little bit more evenly. It's a good change. In PvP, no question, this is absolutely a good change. In PvE, I guess I can't speak to that too much just because I don't do a ton of PvE these days, but as we talked about in the last episode, I have done a ton of PvE in the past, and something that I do know is a lot of what healers do is help the group cheese mechanics and skip mechanics in boss fights. And I think that's been going on for so long that now we think like that's the right way to do it. If I can't cheese through this boss mechanic, then I'm not doing a good job. And I think we just have to rethink it. Now we're just going to have to observe mechanics once in a while. I think probably a good healer probably still can help a group cheese through mechanics, but they're not just going to be able to rely on one single button healing springs to do that. There's going to have to be a little bit more skill and intentionality behind it. I think it's a good thing. And like we said last time, if it gets to a point, if it looks like there's content that people can't get through because the healing isn't strong enough, that content can always be rebalanced. That's going to be an easy change to make in a future update. But so far, I haven't heard anyone complain about any situations like that where, like, oh no, suddenly no one can get through this boss fight because the heals aren't strong enough. I'm in a few pretty large guilds. I'm pretty active in guild chat, and I haven't seen anyone say anything like that this whole week. So I think healing's probably still in a pretty okay place. And the changes to Vigor, the fact that the single target Vigor, no longer hits people around you, I think that one change alone has made healers more needed in dungeons, just because, people aren't splashing each other with passive Vigor casts all the time. So I haven't experienced that myself. Like I said, I haven't been doing any dungeons lately, but it just seems like that would be the case. I don't know, maybe someone can email me, ketsparrowhawk@gmail.com, if you want to give me some insight into what's going on in PvE. But like I said, I haven't seen any complaints, and as far as like what I'm reading on the page here, it seems like everything's probably going to be just fine, and healers are more needed than ever. That's what it seems like. More changes. Off balance is now 7 seconds instead of 5 seconds. Bleeds will now observe your physical resistance. And here's a big one. A lot of PvP people have been discussing this, debating this quite a bit. New cast times on ultimates. So Deathstroke, Dawnbreaker, Berserker Strike, all of those ultimates and their morphs now have a 400 millisecond cast time. And then Soul Shred and Lacerate have a 500 millisecond cast time. I'm not sure why that's different, but they say that the reason that they wanted to do this was to make the damage that gets applied actually line up with the animation of the ultimate. And I think that's an important thing to point out here is the animation hasn't changed at all. The animation isn't any longer than it used to be. It's the exact same animation for these skills as it's always been. The difference now is you can no longer cancel that animation and still get the damage out of it. If you cancel the animation, you also cancel the ultimate, and you get the ultimate points back, and you can cast it again later if you want to. And that's the thing that a lot of PvPers are complaining about, getting rid of the animation canceling for these ultimates. They say that this is an example of the game getting dumbed down and catering to, lower skilled players. I don't know, maybe that's an element to it, perhaps, but I just can't help but think that this is a good change. And I am a big fan of animation canceling. I absolutely use it all the time. I think it's a good thing, and I think the devs are a fan of animation canceling and want to keep it in the game. But for these skills right here, for these ultimate abilities, it's just unfair to be able to cancel out of these animations, especially like Berserker Strike, like the Onslaught morph of that. That animation is already not obvious. It doesn't really look like an ultimate at all, but it hits super duper hard. And if someone cancels the animation, then you just didn't see it happen at all. You just took like 16k damage, right? Like a giant chunk of your health bar is suddenly missing. And even if the person that hit you with it is standing right in front of you, you didn't even see the attack happen. There was no opportunity to avoid that massive hit. Because you literally couldn't see it. So I don't see how there could be an argument in favor of keeping that being the case. When you can hit someone with like basically a guaranteed execute button, and they have zero opportunity to counter it whatsoever because it's literally invisible. So I don't know. I think it's an absolutely good change. And now the damage actually applies when the animation looks like it gets applied. Like in the case of Dawnbreaker, the animation, you raise this giant glowing sword up in the air and then you slam it down on the ground. Well, now that moment that it slams down on the ground, that's when the actual damage gets applied. Is when it looks like it's getting applied is when it gets applied, rather than a few milliseconds before it gets applied. And then you can cancel the animation, and the person on the receiving end doesn't even know what the heck just happened until they look at the recap screen. So, I don't know. Like I said, I'm a big fan of animation canceling, and I don't think the devs are trying to get rid of it, but I do think for these ultimates, it seems fair to me, and I think it's fine. So now you're just going to want to make sure your targets are CC'd before you cast one of these ultimates on them. And I think that's how it should be anyway. Just hit them with some sort of CC ability, and then while they're stunned, you have them sitting nice and still, so you can pop them with your Onslaught or whatever else. Doesn't seem like a big deal to me. I think it's a favorable change. And trust me, this whole week I've been getting hit with Onslaughts like crazy. Onslaught is a very popular ultimate now because of how it was changed this patch. A lot of people are using it, and I've been hit with it a lot, cast time or no. So I don't know. I think that's going to be all right. So let's revisit some of these weapon ability changes. The two-hander, we were just talking about Onslaught, the morph of Berserker Strike. Just a quick reminder, what it does now, so instead, what it used to be was, if you use this as a killing blow, if this was like the actual skill that you used to be the killing blow on someone, then it immediately refunds the cost of the ultimate. So you get it right back, and you can turn around and use it immediately again if you want to, which is very strong. But now, what it does is it converts the amount of resistance ignored into penetration for 12 seconds. If you've never used this ability, Onslaught, what it does is, it hits for a freaking ton. It's one of the hardest hitting ultimates in the game. And one of the things that makes it so special is it completely ignores your enemy's resistance. So, let's say you have a 16,000 tooltip on your Onslaught. You hit somebody with it, no matter how tanky they are, no matter what kind of armor they have on or whatever, they're taking 16,000 damage from that ability. They're taking every single point of that tooltip directly. And then now with this new version, however much resistance they had, however much was ignored by this ability, you now have that much penetration against them for 12 seconds, which is outrageous. That means you have 100% penetration. So not only does Onslaught ignore their resistance, but all the rest of your attacks against them for the next 12 seconds also ignore all of their resistance. Pretty wild, pretty darn wild. So it's went from being basically an ultimate that you would want to use as an execute, right? Because before it gave you, if you executed someone with it, it gave you the ultimate cost back. So you would use it at the end of a fight, basically. Now you're going to want to use it at the beginning of a fight, right? It's going to be probably the first thing you want to hit somebody with. So now they have a bunch of health missing, plus you have 100% penetration against them for the basically the duration of the fight. Because 12 seconds is a very long time, and if they basically have 0 armor against you, then it's not going to last nearly that long. It's going to be over really fast. This is an extremely strong ultimate. I see basically everyone using this. I even see Magicka builds in no CP PvP. I've even seen some Magicka players using this as well. This is basically the new hotness for PvP ultimates right now. If you're not using Onslaught, especially if you're a stamina melee character, you got to get on that. Your kill count will immediately skyrocket as soon as you slot this skill, I promise. I do think they need to nerf it a bit. I think it's a little too strong right now. Maybe at least make that 12-second, like, you ignore the resistance for 12 seconds. Maybe bring that down to more like 8 seconds or even less. I don't know. That seems like a really long duration for an enemy to basically be fighting you naked, more or less. So yeah, I expect them to maybe take another look at that in the future, but we'll see. The new Stampede, I'm a big fan of this change, especially on my Stam DK. This has been really, really nice. So now Stampede, when it's a gap closer ability. And when you hit somebody with it, before it would snare them, it would reduce their movement speed. Now, instead of that, it no longer does that, but what it does is it places an AoE dot on the ground underneath them. And it's a pretty strong dot. I mean, it's like, I think my tooltip on my Stam DK, it's like 1,000 damage per second, which is not bad for an AoE dot this patch. That's pretty darn strong. And what I do, like what my Stam DK does, is I'll use that gap closer and hit somebody, and then I'll immediately fossilize them. It's like the very first thing I do after I use that gap closer is fossilize. And so now I'm using that gap closer. It puts that dot right underneath them, and then I fossilize them directly on top of that dot. So they're stuck there on top of it for a minute. They're taking that damage no matter what, plus I'm laying all the rest of my damage into them while they're stuck there as well. It's really, really effective. I really like it a lot. Plus, that character, I use a couple of proc sets on her. I have Vulcan Scoria, which procs off of dots. So that's just another dot that I have in my toolkit that's more chances for Vulcan to proc. And another set I'm wearing is Red Mountain, which procs off of weapon damage ability or weapon abilities. And so since this is a dot coming from a weapon ability, then each tick of that dot is also another chance to proc Red Mountain as well. Plus the dot itself is dealing damage, so all around, just this one change of this one ability has buffed my Stab DK quite a bit. I'm a really, really big fan of this change. And Rally was one that I was skeptical of. So Rally no longer gives you a heal over time, but what it does do is they change the scaling of the burst heal so that basically you have a better chance of getting a good heal out of it earlier, right? You don't have to wait so long before it actually amounts to a halfway decent heal. If you cast Rally and then you cast a second time, say like 5 or 6 seconds later because you need a burst heal, well, there's a good chance that that's actually going to be a pretty strong heal right then and there, rather than having to wait 15 seconds or more for it to even be an okay heal. So they've adjusted that scaling, and I like that quite a bit. And with that change, plus the changes to Vigor, I really don't notice that heal over time missing at all. It really doesn't seem like a big deal to me. They've also added minor endurance to this ability, which is a buff to some of my characters, not to others. Some of my characters already have minor endurance. But again, my stamina decay, this is not a buff that character had in their kit, and now it is there. Without having to change anything about the character at all, they now have better stamina recovery than they had last week. So all around, these changes to the two-hander skills have buffed my stamina decay considerably. I'm pretty happy about that. One-handed shield, really not much interesting has happened there since the last time we talked. Everything is about the same as it was that first week of PTS. They have some cool new options for playing more offensively, but they still feel very, very tanky. I think they did a pretty good job with one-handed shield for making it like an actual, like, it could be used as an offensive skill line while still having a very defensive kind of play style. It seems pretty cool. I've been seeing some of the new Power Slam and Reverberating Bash. I've seen a few people use that, but it hasn't really caught on yet. But those abilities seem really, really strong. So, it's only been a week. I wonder, as people continue to experiment over the coming weeks, if we'll start seeing more and more of that on these tanky builds we've been seeing here lately. Because it seems like there's some really cool potential there with those skills. Dual wield, same sort of deal. Not a lot has changed with dual wield since our last conversation. I do just want to say that the hidden dagger change seems weird. This was already an ability that not many people were using, and I feel like literally 0 people are using it now. I can see it being useful in like certain boss fights. There are certain boss fights with like important interrupt mechanics, and you need to be able to interrupt something quickly or it's going to be bad news. And a lot of times you have to be able to do that at range as well. So I could see this being a skill where it's like, okay guys, we're fighting this boss, it has this mechanic, everybody slot and interrupt, so I could see it being used situationally like that, but absolutely not. I think it's probably unlikely that it's going to be a skill that's just on people's bars all the time. I think they're just going to slot it in situations where they need it, and probably most of the time otherwise they're not going to use it at all. I wish that the gap closer morph was not the weird like 2-step where you have to activate it a second time to close that gap. I think if they just straight up made it a normal gap closer, that would be better. That would actually be a good reason to use this skill in that case, at least in PvP. So I don't know, maybe that could be a simple change that they make in the future. Just make that one morph, just make it an instant gap closer, and like instantly this will become a skill that makes sense again, I think. With the bow, I think the most interesting change here is that Draining Shot now has a 22-meter range instead of a 28-meter range. And then also a destructive reach from the Destro staff. The changes to that ability as well. The only morph of that skill that still CCs is now 15 meters long. I am seeing less Draining Shot spam, which does make me happy because they have a little bit harder time reaching me with it. But still, that's still 22 meters, whereas Destructive Clench is 15 meters. And so if you're not a Templar and you're a Magicka player, the only ranged CC, the ranged hard CC ability you have access to is 15 meters long. Oh, I forgot about the Warden ability, Arctic Blast. That is a 28-meter stun that still exists in the game. I would think they would put it at least 22 meters to match Draining Shot. Especially like if you're a squishy Magicka player, 15 meters is pretty close. You have to be pretty close to your enemy to use that. So I think for most players, this isn't going to be an ability that they use as part of their normal combo anymore. It's probably going to be more like trying to relieve pressure. Like someone's like applying a lot of pressure to you, and you just need to get them off of you for a second. You can hit them with Destructive Clench to CC them and maybe reposition yourself to have a better chance in the fight. Probably not going to be something that many people use as part of their actual combo, except I could see Magicka Dragon Knights making good use out of it because they're already in close range. All of their abilities are close range abilities. So for a DK, I think they probably won't even really hardly notice the change at all. Aside from the fact that it doesn't apply a dot anymore. I don't know. I wish they would reverse this change. Make destructive reach the one that does CC but doesn't have a dot. So that's a 28-meter long CC but not a dot. And then make destructive clench the one that's a dot. You have to be in 15-meter range to apply it. You know, you're probably already in that range anyway. Like if you're using this for the dot, you're probably using it for PvE purposes. And you're probably already within 15 meters because you have to be that close to apply Wall of Elements, for example. It just seems like it'd make more sense for them to flip that. But you know, I don't know. Maybe they have very very good reasons for doing this. But I really feel this. Pretty much all of my Magicka characters use this ability, but actually they don't anymore. Not this patch because that 15-meter range is way too close for it to really be useful. Except for MagDK. But again, like MagDK is not going to use it either because they have Fossilize, right? So, and that also amounts to a major nerf to the Master Staff, right? Because this ability is what the Master Staff affects, and the whole reason people even want the Master Staff is so that they can spam Destructive Reach, a strong ranged CC ability. You know, and actually get good damage out of it as well and have that cost reduction, so it actually is a good spammable. But now, you know, people aren't going to want to use the Master Staff just to apply a dot over and over and over again. So the only reason to use it still is to spam a ranged CC ability, but now that ability only reaches 15 meters. That's a major nerf to the Master Staff. Which is a major nerf to a lot of builds. My Magicka Sorcerer has been using a Master Staff setup for quite a while, and I just unequipped it. I just put my Master Staff in the bank, and it's probably just going to hang out there a while until maybe hopefully some other change is made later to make it good again. But right now, for me, it's really not worth using. Resto Staff, they made some adjustments to Regeneration and Healing Ward. So Mutagen now, it's no longer called Mutagen, it's now called Radiating Regeneration, and it hits 3 targets instead of 1, which is exactly what people were asking for. I think Regeneration, you know, over during PTS, it was looking really good. The one thing people were saying was, man, if it just hit more than 1 target, we're going to be happy with this. The fact that it could only hit 1 target at a time was scary because you have so little control over who it hits. Now you have the rapid regeneration morph. That's still the case. It only hits 1 player, but it's so strong that maybe that seems fair. And then the radiating regeneration is more of kind of the normal old heal over time that we're used to having, although it is stronger than it used to be, and it hits 3 players. Solid change. And then Healing Ward. They changed Healing Ward to where it's actually maybe worth using again after all this time. So now when you cast Healing Ward, it gives you a heal over time equal to 33% of the shield strength. And in my experience, you basically have to be near death for that to amount to a decent heal. Because you know, Healing Ward, the size of the shield increases based on how much health you're missing. And the only way to really get a good sized shield out of it is to have a lot of your health missing. And really, that's the only time where that heal that's equal to 33% of your shield strength, it's only really a good heal in those situations where you're like really low on health, therefore you get a really big shield, therefore the heal is decent in that situation. If you're just missing like maybe half your health bar or something like that, it's really not going to amount to much, and you're probably better off just casting a burst heal rather than Healing Ward. It's probably going to do better for you in that situation. So it's definitely not overpowered by any means, but it's better than it was before, because the last version was you would get a heal for equal to the remaining shield strength when the shield expires. But the thing is, you know, by the time the shield expires, there's really no shield left anymore because people have been hitting you and it's basically gone. So hardly would you ever actually get that heal at the end. At least with this new change, even if it's a weak heal, you actually are getting something out of it guaranteed as soon as you cast it. So that's a good thing. You know, the first iteration of this, it was a heal equal to 100% of the shield strength, and that was way too strong. But I think 33% maybe isn't quite enough. I think if maybe they bump that up to 40, maybe even 50%, that might be the sweet spot. But I don't know. We'll see. Maybe they really want it to only be a good heal in emergencies. Maybe that's the only time that they intend for this to be a really good heal, is when you are almost dead. And in that case, it is a decent heal in those situations. And if that's their goal, I think they've pretty much hit that right on the mark. So next, let's talk about werewolf. There's no easy way to put it. Werewolves have been pretty heavily nerfed. I really kind of feel bad for them. So well, let's just get into it. First of all, their light attacks do 17% less damage than before. If you've played a werewolf before, then you know it's all about the light attacks, right? Their light attacks are mostly where their damage comes from. They've also received multiple cost increases, and I think werewolf already kind of struggled with sustain, and now they're just going to struggle even more. And also, and this is a big one too, you have to choose the Berserker morph of the werewolf transformation in order to get the bleed damage from light attacks or AoE damage from heavy attacks. That's the only morph that gives you that now. It was in the base ability. If you're a werewolf at all, your light attacks would deal bleed damage and your heavy attacks would deal AoE damage. Now, the base ability no longer does that, and the pack leader morph no longer does that. You have to choose the Berserker morph to get the bleed damage and the AoE damage from heavy attacks. That's a massive nerf to, especially of course, to the pack leader morph. That's probably just a morph that people aren't going to use at all anymore because of that one change right there. On top of that, with the pack leader morph, the pets are no longer targetable and cannot die, which may sound like a good thing, but actually in PvP that is a very, very bad thing, because those pets no longer can act as body blocks for a werewolf, which is the entire reason you even choose this morph at all, is for those pets to absorb damage for you. And that's not going to be possible anymore. Now, if somebody targets you, even if the pet is standing right in front of you, the attack is just going to go right through the pet, and it's going to hit you instead every single time. So that, on top of the fact that with this morph you no longer get bleed damage from your heavy attacks, basically in PvP, no question, no one's using this morph anymore. In PvE, I'm not sure how viable werewolf was to begin with in PvE. It seems like even in PvE, this morph isn't going to be super great even there. I don't know. It feels kind of bad. I've never really liked werewolves. Whenever I see them in battlegrounds, I always make a point to focus them, because honestly, they're often a pretty easy target. You usually just have to keep up the crowd control on them for a little bit, and their sustain runs out really fast, and they're easy pickings from there. Now I think they're just going to be an even easier target than they were before, and already, even before this change, when you get into like higher MMR death matches, you really stop seeing werewolves because werewolves are a terror to like lower level players or inexperienced players. They really can put out a lot of pressure and put out a lot of damage. And if you're new to PvP or you're just kind of a low level player, they can be formidable and they can be really, really hard to deal with. But as you get up into higher MMR matches and you're playing against more and more skilled players, werewolf becomes less and less effective in those situations, to the point where you really don't see them at all in those kinds of matches, even before this patch. And now you just don't see them ever. You never see werewolves. This past week, I saw maybe 2 or 3 werewolves out of dozens and dozens of death matches, and those few werewolves were not doing super great. Quite honestly, they were not doing super great. So I don't know. I feel bad. I feel bad for werewolves. As much as I have always kind of, like I said, made a point to target them. And I just have never really liked werewolves. I can't help but feel some sympathy here for people who do like to play werewolf. This play style is absolutely being gutted, and it seems like not even a year ago they were actually made good for like the first time ever. Werewolves haven't even been that good for very long. They just now kind of got there. And it seems like this is like a couple of giant steps backwards as far as their effectiveness goes. So that's a bummer. I do feel bad for you werewolf people out there. Vampire, no super exciting changes. A little bit of a buff to the bat swarm, a cost reduction and a damage increase. Mist form also gets a cost reduction, which I don't think it needed that. I've definitely been seeing a lot more mist form this week for sure. It's super freaking annoying to deal with because you just can't lay a hand on anyone. I don't know, but in general, I feel like Vampire could use a rework. So it needs to be like revitalized somewhat because it's just kind of a boring skill line. Mist form is really the only interesting skill. I mean, the Bat Swarm ultimate is pretty good. But I think there are other better ultimates, honestly. Mist Form is really the only good active skill in my opinion. And they have a couple of decent passives as well, but in general, it just seems dull, and there's not a lot of great reasons. Really, the only reason people want to be a vampire outside of like RP reasons is for Mist Form. They really just want the Mist Form. Fighters Guild, Circle of Protection, the Turn Undead morph, of course, now is called Turn Evil, and it fears anyone, not just undead. And definitely, we see a lot of fear in Battlegrounds here lately. There is a ton of fear everywhere. You turn around a corner, and your character is feared left and right. This steals a little bit of identity from Nightblades and Werewolves as well, because this was a CC ability that was kind of unique to them up to this point. Now everybody has access to it. Everyone can use fear. And I haven't seen really people use the new Silver Bolts, which is now a ranged spammable ability. I have not really seen that used much, but it seems like a good option for like someone who wants to be a pure archer. It seems like it could be a really cool spammable, and it even like fits with that thematically. If you're an archer, using a crossbow as one of your things like fits with that. So I don't know. I might try to play around with that. I have a stamina warden that I haven't really played with much, but the whole idea with that character was to be a bow only build. So I might try to put this ability on there as my main spammable and see how that goes. Seems like it could be all right. Mages Guild Entropy is the big change there. Of course, we talked about it last time. It's a very, very strong dot now, and it's everywhere. Magicka builds are using this all over the place. It's in pretty much almost every single one of my death recaps. I see Entropy and Soul Trap in pretty much all of them. It's just the meta we live in right now. That's just how it's going to be. And the change to Caltrops, actually, I think has been pretty good for me. Of course, it's one of those AoE abilities that have been nerfed this patch. It's an AoE dot, so the damage has been nerfed, the cost has been increased for sure. But it applies Fracture to anyone that it hits. This has been really great for PvP team play. We come up on a group, I toss my Caltrops on top of that group. Everyone in that team has now has major fracture on them, and so the rest of my team comes in and has just a little bit easier time actually taking them out. Plus, it's of course slowing them down and dealing some damage. And even though the damage is less, it's still damage, and it's not nothing. So in general, I think Caltrops is still a very good skill to use, especially in PvP. PvE, totally different story. The tank is already giving the boss the fracture, so it's a bit of a waste in that regard. But in PvP, man, just being able to apply fracture to an entire area is fantastic. It's really nice. So on to Dragon Knight. Dragon Knight have received a pretty major sustain buff. For one, Searing Heat. Their Searing Heat passive. This passive now increases the duration of the affected abilities by 4 seconds, up from 2 seconds. It also increases the damage of those abilities by 10% instead of 3%. That's going to have a pretty big effect on a DK sustain, just because the longer these skills last, the less frequently they're going to have to recast these skills, which means, better sustain. Plus, they're dealing more damage as well. It's really nice. And then the big one, Combustion. The Combustion passive decreases the cooldown to 2 seconds instead of 5 seconds. So Combustion, whenever you apply the Burning status effect, you get 500 Magicka back, and whenever you apply Poison, you get 500 Stamina back. That was every 5 seconds. Now that happens every 2 seconds. And recovery is measured in 2-second increments, right? So if you have, say, 1,000 Magicka recovery, just as an easy number to work with, that means that you restore 1,000 Magicka every 2 seconds. So this is effectively, like, while you're in combat, this is effectively a 500 recovery buff. Very, very nice. Really strong recovery buff. On top of your abilities just lasting longer as well. I've been playing a lot of Stam DK this week. That's been kind of my character that I've been sort of playing with the most lately. And I can absolutely tell that my sustain is way better. Plus, Rally now has minor endurance, so that's not a DK thing, I know, but it's just my character uses that skill. So that, on top of all of this, I was actually able to increase my weapon damage, get rid of some of my stamina recovery, because I don't need it as much now, because due to this passive and the change to Rally, that more than compensates for that recovery that I'm giving up in favor of damage. So my damage has gone up and my sustain has gone up at the same time, just overnight with this one patch. I'm pretty happy about that. And just real quick about the Corrosive Armor Ultimate, the penetration that you get from that no longer applies to dots. It only applies to the ability itself and then any direct damage attacks that you do after that. And Onslaught is the same way. We talked about Onslaught earlier. It gives you that massive penetration buff, just like Corrosive here does. But that penetration only applies to direct damage attacks, so no dots or anything like that. Still super strong, though. Let's talk a little bit about Nightblades. So in general, man, right now, Nightblade just kind of feels weird. It just... My whole idea of what a Nightblade is seems to be thrown out the window. We're definitely seeing a lot more tanky brawler blades. Of course, we're still seeing just as many annoying stealth gankers as we always have. They still absolutely have that option of gameplay, just like always. That has not been taken away. But they've been given new tools to build themselves differently in more of a brawler tanky kind of way as well. And it's just strange. It's strange to see these tanky Nightblades that like look all like, shadowy and roguish and everything, but they're like all up in the fray and playing kind of like the way a Dragon Knight plays. It's definitely a new thing, and I don't know how I feel about it. I have a Stamina Nightblade, and he was like a rogue, typical kind of ganker type of setup. I have been thinking about turning him into more of a tanky brawler type of build because of some of these changes that have happened recently. Just haven't got around to doing it yet. But I've seen a lot of them out there. Nightblades, I don't know, I think they're in a good spot. It just seems weird is all. And the fact that they can have all this tankiness and everything and also turn invisible seems maybe a little unfair. But I don't know. At the same time, I'm not really seeing a ton of Nightblades like at the top of the scoreboards really either. So I guess there's not much to complain about there. It just seems weird. It's just like I have to rethink what I think a Nightblade is. It's not really exactly what they used to be. Still super annoying. Just the fact that they can turn invisible triggers me quite a bit. Let's talk about the Sorcerer. So this is a big change, in my opinion, a pretty negative change. Surge. The Power Surge morph now grants its healing up to 6 targets, so not just yourself.
and it triggers off of critical heals rather than critical damage. And the cooldown is 3 seconds instead of 1 second. So man, it's just like never ends. It's like, yeah, we just destroyed this ability. And I think their intention is they want to make this specifically a healer ability. If you're a sorcerer healer, this is maybe an ability that you would use. But what we're seeing, like you look at like some of these content creators that have their updated builds and stuff now. Like you go to say like Alcast's website and look at his sorcerer healer build. This skill isn't slotted, and for them to just straight up take this staple skill away from Magsorks, a skill that is like guaranteed on every Magsorks bar pretty much, for them to just straight up rip it away from them, to give it to, specifically sorcerer healers. It needs to be a really, really good change. It needs to be a skill where if you're a Magicka sorcerer, this skill is too good not to use in order to justify this change. It's a real bummer. I really wish this change hadn't been made. I feel like Surge is one of the few abilities that Sorcerer has that actually is a well-balanced, well-designed skill that was just where it needed to be. I don't think this was the Sorcerer ability that people were having a hard time with. They have other abilities that definitely need to be looked at, but I don't think this is one of them. I think the obvious fix here, what a lot of people have been suggesting is, okay, just give Major Sorcery to Critical Surge, right? And it'll give you weapon damage and spell damage. So either Magsork or a Stamsork can choose that morph and get the same functionality that they've been getting out of it all along. And then basically just no one will use Power Surge ever. And that morph will just die, I think, probably. It's probably not the biggest deal in the world. I mean, with the changes to Entropy, that being such a strong dot, and it being a 28 meter range, and it gives you a heal over time, that ability, serves a lot of the same purpose that Surge had filled. So I think a lot of sorcerers are just going to be slotting that, and it's going to be problem solved. Or they could even slot this and then use Critical Surge, the stamina morph of that. To still get that same sort of functionality that they're used to having, and they will still get their Major Sorcery from Entropy. So it's not like Sorcs are out of options. There still is a way to make that kind of setup work. It's just annoying. It's just annoying to take this staple skill away from sorcerers, from like damage-focused sorcerers, and not make it good enough for the people that you made this for to even want to use it. So I hope they continue to look at that. Really, I hope they just revert it back to the way it was. If they're not going to do that, they need to make Power Surge better. They need to make it a stronger heal, and they need to give Major Sorcery to Critical Surge. I think everyone's going to be happy if they do those things. There's really going to be no cause for complaints there. So the changes to the new Eclipse, the Templar ability Eclipse, is probably my least favorite change in this patch. Although I know a lot of Templars are really enjoying it, but like I was saying before, Templars are so super strong this patch. Of course, they're gonna like this because it's just one more amazing tool they have now. So we already talked about the unstable core morph last time, and we spent quite a bit of time on that. And it is, as expected, an extremely strong ability. But I think at the time, before we really all had a chance to actually get in there and test these abilities out, I think that the Living Dark morph was called Total Dark before. Now they renamed it Living Dark. That morph, I think, was receiving less attention during PTS, and now that it's live, we're seeing that actually the Living Dark morph is maybe the one to be more concerned about. It's very, very strong. It's a very good skill, unless you're not a Templar. So just as a reminder, this ability now, you cast it on yourself. You now envelop yourself in darkness for 4 seconds, which protects you anytime an enemy hits you with a direct damage attack, and they are immobilized for 3 seconds, and you are healed when that happens. This says 4 seconds, but I believe there's a Templar passive that increases that up to 6 seconds. So it's a 6 second thing actually. So you cast this on yourself. Anytime somebody hits you, they get immobilized, and you get a heal out of it. So what Templars are doing is they're pairing this skill, Living Dark, up with Race Against Time from the Sijic skill line. And so say you're fighting a Templar, and say maybe you're getting the upper hand, and the Templar sees like, okay, this is a losing fight, I need to get out of here. Well, what they do is they pop Living Dark on themselves, which the next time you attack them, you're going to get immobilized, and they're going to get healed. And then they use Race Against Time for the snare immunity and the movement speed to just run away. And if you try to chase them, if you try to hit them with any kind of CC or anything like that, you're going to get immobilized. And they're just going to keep speeding away with their snare immunity and their major expedition and their bubble that heals them and immobilizes you every single time you touch them. So they're basically just not touchable when they do that. On top of that, this also immobilizes people passively when the Templar doesn't even mean to do it. Anytime they take any kind of damage from you, it's guaranteed to mobilize you if you're not on cooldown. So say you just have, say like you put some caltrops on the ground, and the Templar has this bubble on themselves, and they just walk through that caltrops. You know, they don't even know that you exist, but still you're getting immobilized passively because they took damage from your caltrops. And it happens constantly. If there's a Templar on an enemy team in a battleground, you're basically getting immobilized on cooldown constantly because they're keeping that bubble up, and it just keeps happening because just any passive damage you throw out just triggers this thing, and it really takes a toll on your stamina pool quite a bit. It's really, really annoying. I don't know. I have a feeling that it's probably not going to get changed because the Necromancer, that ability that automatically pulls people in when you damage them with it, you know, that ability exists as well. And so, and it basically has the same problem, although that one's even worse because it actually is a hard CC and it pulls you into groups and stuff where you just have no chance of surviving. So yeah, if you have a Necromancer with that ability and a Templar with their bubble, both of those players on enemy teams, man, you're getting like automatically CC'd basically on cooldown constantly, and they're not even intentionally doing it. You know, they just exist in the battleground, and this is just constantly happening to you. It's really annoying, really, really annoying. I'm not a fan of this kind of ability where this stuff just automatically procs passively, and the person who casts the ability, there's no intentionality on their part whatsoever. Very, very frustrating. And this one change, I feel like, has completely undone all the work that they've done to make movement speed in PvP feel better. Over the last several patches, they've been making a lot of efforts to make movement speed in PvP feel better because there's been a lot of complaints about that. And honestly, I think they've been doing a good job at that, and movement speed has finally gotten to a point where it feels pretty good. But then this one change basically completely undoes it because you're being immobilized on cooldown pretty much constantly if there's a Templar anywhere around. And Templar is the new meta right now. Templars are everywhere. So that means there's multiple people wearing this most of the time. So it's bad. I don't like it at all. I hope they change it. Maybe only proc off of direct damage. I think maybe if it only procs off of direct damage only, that might be the fix, where it's still effective for those situations where the Templar just wants to get out of a situation, and it's going to help them run away. But there's not going to be so much of this passive, just people being immobilized by accident all the time. It's really frustrating. So I think that's the easy change. Just make it proc off of direct damage only. And I think we're good with this skill. Still a very strong skill. And then I just want to repeat, I know I mentioned this last time, but I'm just really pumped about it. Cleansing Ritual got a 95% buff. It heals for 95% more than it used to. And it was already a super strong skill. It's just even stronger now. And of course, a couple of patches ago, they made it so that it scales off of your stamina stats or magicka stats. So it's super strong for both magicka Templars and stamina Templars. Really pumped about Cleansing Ritual. Yet another example of why Templars are so very strong this patch. This is already a skill that they're using no matter what because of the super strong cleanse. So a skill that they were already using is now twice as good, basically. um, so be a Templar this patch. Be a Templar. Nothing major for Warden. They just kind of reworked some numbers. No major like reinventing of skills or anything like that. No major nerfs or buffs. I think they've been pretty happy with Warden for a while now, and I don't really expect to see any major changes coming. Wardens are still extremely strong in PvP. Very very strong, especially in group play. They're very good for groups. But Necromancer has gotten a couple of changes. So their siphoning abilities, their Shocking Siphon and Restoring Tether, those abilities that like have these tethers with corpses. So those abilities are now free to cast, and they now scale off of your highest offensive stats, either Magicka or Stamina. Now Stamina Necromancers have the option of using these, and they don't cost anything to cast. And the thing is Necromancer, one of the biggest pain points for a Necromancer is their sustain. People have been complaining that sustain feels really bad on Necro. This could be the change that was needed to make sustain feel okay on this class. And the fact that stamina players now have the option to use these abilities as well. It's just stronger class identity. I think it's absolutely a good thing. I still haven't seen a ton of Necromancers this week, but it's only been a week. I think maybe as people have more time to figure stuff out and get their builds figured out, that we may start seeing more Necromancers, because I feel like this is definitely going to have a positive effect on just how good it feels to play a Necromancer. I think the fact that they're free to cast, I think it's probably okay given how limited these abilities are. You have to be within range of these corpses in order to use them, and line of sight breaks that tether as well. So they're already just difficult abilities to use. I think the free cast is maybe what was needed to make these abilities feel worthwhile and feel rewarding. You maybe won't get so frustrated in these situations where your line of sight is breaking your beam or whatever. I think that could be good. I'm interested to see what players do with that. I definitely do expect to see more tanky Necros. I think this is going to help like a stamina focused like tank Necro do what they do even better. And Necros were already quite tanky. I would say that was their one strongest point, is it's very easy for a Necromancer to be quite tanky. And I think that's going to be even more so the case now. So I think that's just about all I wanted to talk about. In general, healing is a lot different. Dots are a lot stronger, maybe too strong. I really hope they tone those down in a future patch. But if they don't, I do want to remind everyone that everybody has easy access to a cleanse. In the Alliance War, the support skill line, there's a skill in there called Purge, which costs 7,000 Magicka. It's pretty expensive, but it has a morph called Efficient Purge, which takes it down to 4.8 Magicka. Which is still kind of expensive, but when you compare that, say, to the Templar's Extended Ritual, that costs 4.1 K Magicka. So it's really not that much more expensive than the best cleanse in the game. It's in that same ballpark, and it's a pretty comparable skill. When you cast Efficient Purge, it automatically cleanses your teammates right away. Not even Extended Ritual does that. When a Templar puts Ritual on the ground, they cleanse themselves, and then their teammates have the option to activate a synergy to cleanse themselves. But with the support skill here, Efficient Purge, they just get cleansed when you cast it. And I think it removes 3 abilities. Pretty sure. Double check. Yep, 3 abilities that just instantly gets removed from them. And 4.8 thousand Magicka. It's expensive, like I said, but it's really not prohibitively expensive. And even a Stamina build could pull that off. I mean, Stamina Templars use Extended Ritual 4.1k all the time, and they make that work no problem.
So 4.8 is doable, especially if you're not using many other skills that use magicka. So that's a great option. If you're a magicka build, it's a no-brainer. I would try to find a way to slot this if you're not a Templar. It's going to make life a lot easier in PvP. You get a few bad effects on you, cast this thing really quick, they're gone, and you can heal up and get back in the fight. But all in all, I've been having fun this week. I think I'm still going to continue to have fun. I have 10 different characters to get through to kind of finish my tweaks on and figure out how they're going to be built now in the new situation here. So it'll take me a little bit of time to get everything sorted out, and then by then I'm sure there'll be a whole other batch of changes, and we'll start it all over again, and the cycle continues. But that's okay. This is the fun part for me. I really enjoy theory crafting. I enjoy having just a bunch of new elements to play with to figure out how to make my characters effective again in this new meta. So I'm looking forward to things. I've been having a good time, like I said, and so far from what I can tell, PvP is still fun. PvE is still fun. There are a few frustrations. Some of the changes to Templar are particularly frustrating. So, of course, not everything's perfect. There's definitely criticisms to be made. But at the same time, there's also still plenty of fun to be had as well. And most of the pain points aren't so severe that I'm not having a good time, So that's where we're at. And I think that's going to be the end of the episode. So thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time. If you'd like to get in touch with me, feel free to send me an email at catsparrowhawk@gmail.com or look me up on Twitter @catsparrowhawk.